And welcome back. This is The Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Mil Arcega. Well, in the Philippines, they call him the Punisher. Rodrigo Duterte, whose foul-mouthed populist campaign earned him both praise and ridicule, both at home and overseas, is the winner of this week's Philippine presidential election. Duterte, the 71-year-old mayor of Davao City in the country's south, won a convincing victory against his rivals, former Interior Secretary Mar Rojas and Senator Grace Poe. Now, with more than 90% of the votes tallied, Duterte has at least 39% of the popular vote, splitting the votes for Manila insiders Rojas, who got 23%, and Poe, who garnered just 22%. Senator Poe conceded on Monday, saying she would respect the election results and work with Duterte. The Philippine government is expected to release final election results next week. And to explain the local and regional impact of this political development in the Philippines, we are joined by our two Steves. Southeast Asia correspondent Stephen Herman via Skype from Tokyo. Nice shot, Stephen. And joining me here in Washington, Steve Miller, former Asia blogger and now reporter, blogger, broadcaster for VOA's Worldwide English Service. Boy, that's a mouthful. Welcome to both of you, Steves. Good to have both of you again on the program. But Steve Miller, the Philippine election, and Duterte happens to be one of the subjects in your upcoming debut of Asia Weekly blog. Yes. That's on May 20th. What can you tell us, first of all, our viewers, about this man, Rodrigo Duterte?
Well, as you mentioned, he's called the Punisher. He's been the mayor of Davao for 21 or so years. Long time, former lawyer, actually got kicked out of Ateneo down in Mindanao as well, and is known to be really tough on crime, and that's kind of where he tailored his campaign. Tough on crime, right. Tough on corruption.
Is that what made him so attractive? Because he seems to have come completely out of nowhere. Nobody knew anything about this guy a year ago, and all of a sudden, like he's the face on all the newspapers there.
Well, I think when you look at the landscape of the election, you had 6 candidates running for president, 4 who were front runners, and effectively split the ticket, so to speak. So his campaign truly resonated with a lot of people who were fed up with corruption, fed up with crime, and he really honed in on that, and that's how he got the votes.
And some of the controversial remarks, I'm sure, had a lot to do with his popularity. Now, Steve Herman, let me get you into this conversation. There's a big question mark, Stephen, right now on how Duterte might actually alter the balance of power in Asia. As you know, he's been critical of China and its designs there in the South China Sea, but he's also expressed doubts about the dependability of the United States as an ally. Does having a loose cannon like this new Philippine president complicate matters somewhat in that region?
Absolutely, Mil. He's a wild card, and his position on China has been somewhat contradictory. He's suggested a willingness to engage with China one-on-one over the South China Sea issue in exchange for giving China some economic benefits in the Philippines. But he's also proposed multilateral roundtable discussions that China obviously would oppose. And his position now will become quite critical because Philippines will have the chair of ASEAN next year, 2017. So his position, Philippines' position, will really matter in the months and years ahead.
So Steve Miller, I mean, he could be sort of a bit of a spoiler there. Do you think Duterte is opportunistic enough to sort of play both sides against each other, China and the United States?
Well, I'm not so sure about that. One thing you have to keep in mind is that he was mayor of Davao, a city of 1.5 million. Now he's the prospective leader of a country of 100 million. And he'll have access to a lot of advisors that can really shape his domestic and foreign policy. And I spoke to an analyst earlier this week who said, we just have to wait and see because he's already changed his tone on a lot of things just since being named president. I mean, we saw what he called the Pope. And he's already said he's willing to go to the Vatican and make a personal apology. So he's starting to act more presidential. So I have to see what his policies.
He called the Pope, Stephen, the son of a whore. Now, how does a leader in a country that is 90% made up of Catholics get away with a statement like that?
Well, I wouldn't say he actually got away with it because a lot of people were really upset with that.
But he won the election.
Well, he won the election, but he didn't have the most votes. He didn't have 50 plus 1%. He had 39, 40% vote. He had the most votes of those cast. So I wouldn't exactly characterize this as the most of all.
Right. Steve Herman, there's a big contrast in the leadership styles between the current president, Benigno Aquino, and this man, Duterte. Could those very different styles sort of signal some kind of trouble for the economic system in that region? As you know, the Philippines' gross domestic product has been among the fastest in that region, and a lot of it is being credited to the sort of slow and steady and stable style that Aquino has sort of imposed in that country. How does the Duterte affect the markets there, say in Tokyo?
Well, the Philippine stock market has rallied since his election, perhaps based on a belief in his statement that he's going to leave economic policy to advisors. And we don't know if that'll apply to other areas such as foreign policy, and it doesn't seem like it so far. But I think here in Japan, there's definitely nervousness. And really the key external partners of the Philippines are Japan, the United States, and Australia, and Duterte has already made very belligerent comments about Australia's foreign policy and also the U.S. when issues are raised about human rights, and some of the comments he's made. He's basically told them to get out. Well, that's not very diplomatic,
Yeah.
and if the Philippines really wants to play China off against other countries, it needs very strong support in his administration from Washington, Tokyo, and Canberra.
So Steve Miller, you seem to be suggesting that he's already making that pivot to being a more responsible kind of leader, because in the past he has made a lot of controversial comments that has irked a lot of people in the international community. Are we being fair to Donald Trump when we suggest that this Rodrigo Duterte guy is perhaps the Asian version of a Donald Trump?
Well, I mean, some people have come out and said that it's not a good analogy, because with Duterte, at least you have some public service to go back on and see how he ran on it. There's still a lot of unknowns with Duterte, so we'll have to see in the future.
So tell me a little bit, Stephen. The Philippines actually made some news as well with the election of the first transgender politician.
Yeah, so Geraldine Roman over in Bataan. And here's a woman who got 62% of the vote in a country that's largely Roman Catholic.
And very old-fashioned,
very
conservative in those kinds of
old-fashioned,
views.
and actually, she's going to take up the seat that her mother left. So it's a great story coming out of Bataan.
Okay, so Steve Herman, I'm going to give you the last word. You've seen a number of recent elections there. Nearly all of them seem to have suggested a feeling of change that a lot of people in that region want. Is this more evidence, further evidence of the election of Rodrigo Duterte that Asia is in the midst of some massive changes?
Well, this is definitely a slap in the face of the elite in the Philippines, because Duterte was not the candidate for the elite.
He's not the establishment candidate at all, was he?
Right. But the only glimmer of hope, I think, if we look besides his leadership in Davao, is he's a trained lawyer, and he was a prosecutor, so he understands law. This is not someone who's been totally off the grid and just popped into elected office. So quite a contrast, for example, with Donald Trump and the Republican Party, where he was a true outsider, a businessman that had no background in politics, somebody who was not a lawyer. So perhaps it's an unfair comparison there for Rodrigo Duterte to compare him to Donald Trump.
It makes for fascinating politics and discussion. Thank you so much, Steve Miller and Stephen Herman. We're going to take another quick break, but when we come back, a new movie based on the most popular historical photograph in the U.S. National Archives, when the king of rock and roll went to the White House. And just a reminder, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts, questions, and comments on our Facebook page. The address is VOA The Correspondents. We'll be right back.